The Solve Climate project has easy-to-use teacher's guides in nearly every subject and in 3 languages to help teachers make climate relevant to their class. It only takes courage. Don't take no for an answer. Ask them, why not? This is your future. You'll be surprised how many teachers will say yes and thank you. Imagine you, thousands of leaders like you around the world asking their teachers once every school term to make climate a class. That means every term going forwards, hundreds of thousands, millions of students worldwide in their classes talking about climate solutions. COVID has shown how fragile our global economy and society are to extreme events. It's also shown that vulnerable people are facing the hardest, most damaging impacts. This is also true with climate change. Science has made it clear that unchecked, global warming will mean an unending onslaught of extreme events, causing untold suffering for humanity and all creatures, species driven to extinction, a planet of environmental refugees. And yet, in many ways, this is the most exciting time to ever be alive as a human. We have the tools and networks and technologies to rewire the world with clean energy, reimagine the global food system, reinvent transportation, and regenerate forests and grasslands, and be well on our way to solving climate by 2030. Tonight, we will learn how to do this in our own cities, our own towns, our own regions. Thank you for the work you will do to promote climate solutions and a just world.
Thank you. I will now turn this over to Jay to lead this exciting conversation and introduce our panelists. Thank you very much, Jay.
Thanks so much, Leah. Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Shimshak. I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at UVA's Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. Welcome. We're super excited you're here. Thanks to Leah, to George Mason's Institute for a Sustainable Earth, and UVA's Environmental Resilience Institute for the opportunity to join you today. A big thank you in advance to our distinguished panelists, and especially to all of you that are in the audience. I'm super excited for this important dialogue about climate solutions and their co-benefits. And just to set the stage a little bit, I'll note that as Professor Goodstein stated in the introductory video, when it comes to climate change, the stakes here are significant. They include things like coastal flooding, vulnerability to storm surge, heat-related injuries, tropical diseases, less reliable water supplies, changes in agricultural productivity, species extinction, biodiversity loss, long-run ecological change, more extreme weather events, and in places we've not seen them before, wildfires, changing energy needs. And as Professor Goodstein noted, these consequences and many others can be expected to disproportionately affect the most vulnerable members of our society. In addition, it's worth noting that at least in principle, the climate change problem is daunting. There are huge spillovers across space in that the consequences of every one of our choices affect everyone else worldwide. And in addition, there are huge spillovers through time. The consequences of choices made by past and present generations will affect generations to come. But there's also hope. We have the expertise. We're developing technological solutions. We have policy solutions. And most importantly, we have you. We have people like our panelists. We have people like you in the audience. We have your energy, your creativity, your leadership, both now and for many years to come. So with that stage very briefly set, our plan for the next 75 minutes or so is to hear brief prepared remarks from the panel and then leave the majority of time for discussion. Please, please, please submit any questions through the Q&A function, and I'll try to keep track of those along with my colleagues. And I will have several questions of my own as well, I suspect. So let me briefly introduce our very distinguished panel. We'll kick it off with Fatima Ahmad, who is Senior Counsel for the U.S. House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. She will give us an overview of some current climate action proposals. Then three panelists will help us better understand this notion of co-benefits of climate action. So climate action is, of course, designed to stabilize climate, but my colleagues will also argue that thoughtful and meaningful climate action will come with big advantages for air quality, for human health, for consumer energy bills, for job creation, and lots of other things. So in addition to Fatima, our panelists include Carrie Hearn, Associate Director of the Energy Equity Program at the Virginia Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy, David Murray, the Executive Director of Chesapeake Solar and Storage Association, and Dr. Jerry Paulson, who's advisor to the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health and Professor Emeritus of Pediatrics and Environmental and Occupational Health at George Washington University. So none of you have come here to hear me talk. So let me turn it over to our distinguished colleagues. So Fatima, take it away, please.
Thank you for that great introduction. I'm really excited to be here. This is an exciting conference. It's great that it's happening in lots of places. I'm excited to speak with you all. I mean, I think the main thing I want to leave you guys with is that a lot of people have a question about what is Congress doing about climate change? What is the president going to do? Is there any kind of plan? And what I want to leave you with is that, yes, there is a plan. What we need now is the political will to make it happen. So let me describe what this plan is. If you can see in my background, I have a hyperlink here to our Climate Crisis Action Plan from Congress, and I'll also put it in the chat. That's a link to an overview of the breakdown by issues. So basically, last Congress, Speaker Pelosi created the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis to find a holistic way to look across all the jurisdictions of the different committees in Congress within the House of Representatives, and to figure out what each committee could do within its jurisdiction on climate change. So last summer, we came out with a 500-page climate crisis action plan, which covers all aspects of the economy from electricity to transportation. We talk about reducing emissions. We also talk about increasing resilience to climate impacts. We talk about the connections between climate change and health, and very focused on workers and communities and environmental justice. So now that this plan is out there and it's, everyone can see it, many of the bills did pass the House last Congress, but they were not enacted into law. Some actually were enacted into law, and that's like a lot of provisions on research and development of clean energy technology. So that was really great. But now here in the 117th Congress, Democrats now have control of the House, they have control of the Senate and the White House. And so now what we're trying to do is move these concepts forward. And you may have heard that President Biden has moved forward some large packages. The first one was the American Rescue Plan. That was primarily a response to COVID. There were a couple of pieces from our Climate Crisis Action Plan in that bill. For example, there was some funding for environmental justice groups, and there was also some funding for mass transit. As you know, mass transit took a huge hit during the pandemic. But now the major opportunity for climate solutions is here with the American Jobs Plan. So that is what the president just announced recently. And it is full of climate solutions across every sector, from transportation, where we can talk about rail and investing in EVs, to the electricity sector, where we can talk about building new transmission lines. And it is called the American Jobs Plan because Democrats do believe that there are huge jobs opportunities from fighting the climate crisis. And that is a major theme that we'll keep coming back to. I think that in general, when we put together the Climate Crisis Action Plan, we met with all sorts of stakeholders, environmental groups, student groups, climate policy experts. And what they all said was, first, do no harm, protect the ability of states and cities to go further. And so that is how the Climate Crisis Action Plan is designed, so that for every federal policy, we suggest we allow for the possibility for states to set even more stricter standards and go even faster. But there's a lot of ways that the federal government can help states and cities achieve their goals, including through federal tax credits for clean energy and clean vehicles, block grant programs like for energy efficiency. And then the federal government has a convening power to bring together different states, companies together to identify regional solutions. So a good example of this is with the offshore wind announcement that we had recently. Offshore wind could really generate some regional industries, from upgrading the ports to also potentially creating some of the vessels that are needed. and providing some of the operations and maintenance crews. So this is something that could really revitalize regional economies. So let me pause there, and I'm happy to address any of that during the questions.
Thank you so much, Fatima. Please keep your questions coming. Thank you to our colleague who has submitted one. But in the meantime, we'll collect questions and we'll keep moving on. Carrie, please take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation to join you. Again, my name is Carrie Hearn. I'm the Associate Director of Energy Equity Programs at Virginia's State Energy Office. And it's really inspiring to hear all of the remarks from previous speaker around what the Biden administration is doing and the aggressive goals that are coming from the federal government. And I will say that there's a lot of very similar actions happening in Virginia, and similar landscape in terms of how the government is structured currently in terms of who's controlling the House, Senate, and the governor's office. Virginia is a member of the U.S. Climate Alliance as well as the Clean Energy States Alliance. And so we work with a number of other states on how do we implement the climate goals within Virginia. And in the past couple of years, there have been several very ambitious clean energy policies that have passed the state, namely in the 2020 session around the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And then this year, a number of other policies that are taking that even further around electric vehicles, et cetera. But I'm really here to talk about the co-benefits of clean energy. And I thought I would just mention, a little bit about myself. Personally, I grew up in rural Appalachia in West Virginia. And I'm the daughter of a recycling, guru, someone who really instilled land stewardship and recycling ethics. And then when I grew up and went to school and started learning about how all of these systems come together, I kind of went down this path of systems thinking and understanding how all of the different systems fit together and our role as citizens, as employees, as members of a community, and how it can all kind of add up to solve something like a climate crisis. And so I really encourage everyone to kind of think about systems thinking as that bigger overarching model, and how do we fit into it? Where do we find our energy and passion? And how can we apply it at the local level, as something such as solar will be permitted at the local level. It'll be decided at the local level. And there's so much interesting things that you can do as a student or as a resident to show up at your local planning meetings or other meetings that they would really love to hear from you as well. So a couple of things about co-benefits of clean energy. When you're owning that system, the customer, whether you're a business owner or a homeowner, you will experience those direct benefits on your bill. So they will reduce your bill credits. But when we talk about a just transition or energy equity, we need to make sure that everyone has access to that financing. So some of the programs that we're working on at the state level are looking at things like solar loans or rebate funds that can reduce those costs up front or provide more equitable access to clean energy financing so that everybody can experience those same types of benefits. From a land use perspective on utility scale solar, there are some really interesting innovations that are coming out around Agri-Voltaics. And that word sounds really weird. It's not a word that I was familiar with before I started this job, but it's essentially the co-location or the dual use of both solar and agriculture. So you could have livestock grazing on a solar farm, such as sheep or cattle. You could also have things like sweet potatoes growing beneath the solar panels, and the growth of those crops creates a cool environment that cools the panels to make them more efficient. And likewise, the panels create a shaded environment that in many sunny places will create a more healthier, fruitful crop. So those are some interesting things to think about in terms of the siting of solar and large scale solar, where there may be on hundreds, if not thousands of acres. So we can do more than just one thing at a time on these sites. And from the government perspective, from Virginia, we can look into research and development in terms of how do we make those systems more feasible and bring down the cost overall. On the, back to who owns the systems, there are new opportunities in Virginia around shared solar, or in what's called community solar in many other states. And that model can be structured so that many individuals can come in together and co-own that system, and again, receive those bill credits on their bills to reduce their costs of energy overall. There can also be revenue streams to the locality. And in Virginia, we're working on, we have various tax structures that can be applied. So localities can experience those consistent revenue streams to support their community schools or fire stations or communication systems through those tax models. I could go on about the community benefits and benefits to, the owners and others, but essentially there's, I think I'll leave it at that, and we can talk about more of this in our Q&A. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for that perspective on co-benefits. David, I think you have some additional perspectives as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Jay, and to everyone at UVA, GMU for putting this together. My name is David Murray. I serve as Executive Director for the Chesapeake Solar and Storage Association. We represent the installers, developers, manufacturers who are all the boots on the ground in Virginia, deploying solar and battery storage solutions in order to make our grid more resilient and also cleaner. So if you live in Virginia right now, you are in the top 4 state in terms of renewable growth, or solar growth in the entire country. Virginia is seeing a solar boom, so you are in the right place if you want to work in solar and storage in the next few years. One of the benefits about working in the solar industry, I always compare it to the track team. Now, I know you all can't see me in person, but if you did, you'd be able to say, well, this guy in no way is a shot putter, and I certainly wouldn't trust him sprinting either. I was a distance runner. The solar industry is the same way. We have engineers, we have policy advocates, we have installers, crew leaders, electricians. We have folks that do community relations. We have folks, Carrie talked about community solar, making sure that we're reaching out to different communities and making sure they have access to solar savings. We have people that go to door to door and sign folks up, educate them about the savings that they can see about solar. So no matter what your skill set or what your background is, there is an opportunity for you in the solar energy industry. And it's becoming even more and more vibrant as we begin to adopt battery storage solutions and deploy those to make sure our grid is more resilient and allows us to offset peak power demand and really save ourselves money in the long term. So in Virginia, I think there's a number of incredible benefits, including the fiscal benefits that Carrie mentioned. When you hear about these solar farms and large solar projects going up across the state, each of those panels is paying a share of the energy generated to the county. So if you're a rural county, particularly one that's experienced a lot of population loss, struggling to maintain a diverse portfolio of incomes, you have the opportunity to supplement that income with solar power through tax revenue. So that not only supports the county, but it also allows landowners and families to keep a farm within their family for the generation to come, because they're receiving lease payments for solar. And these are the kinds of things that really doesn't get out there when we're talking about climate change and environmental benefits of solar power. These are jobs. This is tax revenue for a generation. And so I really want to highlight that. And I'm excited we've had dozens of folks chime in to this session and to be joined by these fantastic co-panelists. So please submit your questions. Don't be shy. I know we're all eager to receive them. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jay.
Thanks so much. And I will, in turn, turn it over to Jerry Paulson, who will give us a health perspective on co-benefits of climate change action. Take it away, Jerry.
Well, good afternoon. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this global series of webinars, not just this one webinar here in Virginia, but the notion that there are webinars throughout the country and around the globe is really inspiring. I'm happy to have the opportunity to represent the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health and Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action. The consortium involves most of the major physicians' professional societies in the US, and Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action is a membership organization of over 400 health professionals in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Solving climate by 2030 is a bold but achievable goal. Those of us on this panel and hundreds of thousands of other people around the globe are working hard on this problem. Hopefully, from this point forward, there will be steady progress and many opportunities for your participation in solving climate. Hopefully, we will turn from setting goals to actually achieving decreases in CO2 equivalents in the atmosphere. Hopefully, we will move forward with justice and equity. Hopefully, leaders around the world and communities that they represent will respond to the climate crisis with measurable changes in policies and behavior. First and foremost, what is the single most important thing that you can do to solve climate by 2030? You can vote. Participate in the process. Don't drop out. Elections have consequences. Make sure that you, as you move during your career, you register to vote and you vote. Get others registered, get others to vote, consider even running for office. I'm a pediatrician. I see the world through the health lens. Research shows that climate change impacts on human health. Mental health injuries, mental health issues, injuries, vector-borne infectious diseases, allergic diseases and asthma, nutrition as it relates to food quality and quantity, heat-related illness and sleep deprivation, and the impact of air pollution on human health. These are all issues that you can be involved in solving, both at the personal level and, if you choose, at the professional level. Climate solutions are health solutions. Eat less meat, and you decrease the production of greenhouse gases from cattle and the transportation of the meat to market. Eat less meat and more of a Mediterranean diet, and you have decreased your risk of cardiovascular disease. Decreasing meat in your diet decreases the risk of type 2 diabetes, supports a healthy weight and good kidney function. Walk more, and you decrease the production of greenhouse gases that would have been derived from motor vehicles. Walk more, and you have improved your cardiovascular and mental health. If you can work with others to close down a coal-fired electric generating plant, you will have decreased greenhouse gases. You will have reduced the particulate matter and toxic gases that are released by the combustion of coal. You will also have reduced one of the largest sources of mercury that then gets into the water to contaminate fish and to damage brains of people when they eat the fish. There are other climate solutions that are health solutions, but this gives you some ideas. We must ensure that the most vulnerable people are helped to reach climate solutions that are just and equitable. Health professionals are appropriate people to carry the message about the climate crisis. Research done at the Center for Climate Change Communication at George Mason University shows that nurses, doctors, pharmacists, and other health professionals are credible messengers about climate change and climate solutions. Simple messages delivered repeatedly by credible messengers can change people's attitudes and behaviors about climate change. Climate adaptation and mitigation will require a lot of work, will in fact require an all of society approach to the problem. The solutions start with factually, scientifically driven approaches to all of these problems. Once you have the facts, you need to advocate. You must vote, and you can choose to make other forms of advocacy part of your life's work. It may be a small part or a large part, but please stay engaged. With that and the work of hundreds of thousands and millions of people globally, we can solve climate by 2030. And with that, I'll turn it back to the panel.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Please send your questions in, and thank you to those that have done so already. We'll get to those in a minute, and we hope to have a robust discussion. But let me kick off the conversation with a question that I've been thinking about, which is the types of climate action that Fatima mentioned as part of the Climate Crisis Action Plan and many other potential approaches are argued by Carrie, Jerry, David as having these big benefits for air quality, health, consumer energy bills, jobs, lots of other things. So my point of departure is, why haven't we seen more of this?
I'm happy to share. I know I can probably be a little more political than Carrie can be, given that I don't work in the government. But you know, there's the saying about seeing a turtle on top of a fence post. Well, it didn't get there by accident. Right now in Virginia, we have very low percentage of homes with solar on them. Well, that's not by accident. When you have a regulated utility whose interest it is to sell you power, they're going to fight tooth and nail to prevent homeowners from doing so and make it increasingly challenging for them. So when we're talking about a transition to clean energy, we need to think about who might lose money from that transition and who might not be on the other side of that, whether you're in gas or coal or other traditional forms of energy. And so another piece is honestly just the sheer siting challenges. So it's very hard to put solar panels on rooftops because oftentimes the roof doesn't support it. There are might have shading on top of the roof. It could be an old building, and so also, you know, customers, they can be very challenging to work with because this is a big investment, and so it can often be a lot for folks to make that transition. And so, you know, we have both political barriers, but we also have physical ones. And I think another political barrier is you know, the communities who don't want solar near them. I always say, you know, no one's granddad or grandmom was a solar installer, so it's very unfamiliar to us. And so when you have an unfamiliar technology coming to town, you often encounter a lot of resistance. And so we're definitely seeing a lot of NIMBYism, a lot of concerns about solar deployment. But I think we'll get past this inertia, and it just makes us beholden to educate folks more, to make sure that everyone feels included in the solar industry and has access to the benefits that it provides.
Thank you so much. I will just say that I'm going to return to you, David, and also Carrie, with a audience question that is a bit in the weeds. But before we get down into those weeds, it relates to what you just answered. It seems like others of you had high-level responses to that question. Fatima, it looks like you had unmuted and were thinking about providing an answer. So why don't you give us your perspective, and then I'll turn it over to Jerry, and I'll ask David and Carrie the in the weeds question.
Yeah, sure. That sounds great. I mean, I think those are some really helpful perspectives from on the ground when you're actually trying to deploy climate solutions. And I think from a political perspective, when you look at polling, clean energy is very broadly supported across the country. However, until recently, it was like maybe number 9 or 10 on people's top list of top issues. Recently, in the past year or so, it has really risen. And so now it's really one of the issues that voters care about most. So I think that's why you're starting to see so much momentum around this issue. And I think, you know, unfortunately, we've just had a couple of years recently with just very expensive disasters, people are starting to see that the costs of climate change are already taking place. We can't afford to do nothing. And so I think that's why you're seeing a lot of momentum now after a long period of small steps, but maybe not the bold sweeping changes we needed.
I think that, we have to be cognizant of the fact that there's been 70-year plus history of disinformation campaigns in the United States and globally related to climate change. People in the fossil fuel industry and in other places have actively lied to the public about the risks of climate change. They have actively blocked the government from taking action on climate change. Climate change is a solvable problem, but it's not going to be solved by individuals. I talked about eating healthy. That's important. And I encourage as a physician, everybody to eat healthy. And I'm really glad that eating healthy helps to decrease greenhouse gases. But that's not going to do it. We need an all of society approach. And we've had people working very hard to prevent the creation of that all of society approach. We're beginning to overcome it, but it's 70 years and a lot of money that's been spent to get us in the wrong place at the right time.
Carrie?
I'll just add that we are playing the long game and we have to have urgency right now, right? So that's sort of the tension point that we're experiencing as we have, decades worth of investment to transition from what we were previously investing in to a new form of technology, a new energy sectors. And, to our government's credit, there has been a lot of research and development that has been poured into the renewable energy industry over the past, you could probably say 40 years or more. To get us to where we are now. Now, could have we done that faster? Absolutely. But we're in a transition, and every transition, has this sort of ramp up period. And I think now, if you look at the growth curves of just looking at solar or wind, in terms of the accelerated expansion of those technologies, energy efficiency the same way, there's going to be an exponential curve, and it's going to be rapidly implemented. And we have the wind in our sails right now, but it is a transition. And using the diet analogy, you can't step on the scales 2 weeks after you start your diet and expect to have your full results right in front of you. So it takes time, and we have to keep that progress moving forward with rapid speed.
On this point of transitions, one of our audience members, Sheila, raises a question that she has experience with a community-supported loan for solar panels, and she is finding that she's not actually benefiting from this, and in fact may be losing out because maintenance and repair were not included, and the system feels outdated already. So these transition points are often really challenging for the people involved. Yeah. So what are your responses to that, and how would you suggest that the regular person deal with some of those transition issues and frustrations?
I can totally empathize with that frustration. And in fact, a call earlier today, we were talking with one of our partners on this new low to moderate income solar loan and rebate fund around the actual structure that the financing would take place in, and talking about the benefits and the opportunities for a solar lease structure, for example, or a power purchase agreement. And these are the types of structures that takes the kind of the maintenance and that long-term burden off of the customer who's hosting that solar system. And it keeps it, with the entity that is maybe claiming that tax credit and owning the system and has the burden of maintaining it. for someone who already owns the system and, is experiencing some of those issues. I'm not sure if David has a good solution for that, but those are really important points to bring up when we're structuring these programs to begin with and having the foresight to think 15 years down the road and what is that technology going to be looking like.
We in Virginia are really lucky to have folks like Carrie working on issues like this. From the solar industry perspective, if someone has an experience like Sheila noted, we really want to avoid this type of thing because it's an investment that people make for 25 to 30 years. Sheila, I popped my email in the chat box to see if we can help with your specific situation. I will say that SEIA National, our parent organization, has a customer protection sort of hotline or bureau where they want to provide resources to folks that have issues not coming out ahead or there's an issue with the contract, because everyone should be seeing savings from going solar, and so we want to make sure that you can get back to saving money and address that maintenance issue. But again, with a new industry like the solar industry, you're going to have a lot of different companies pop up, and then not everyone's going to make it because it is very new, and so that raises the question of, well, who do I call if my system doesn't work anymore? And so there are a number of firms that provide that service, and there's also organizations like Solar United Neighbors, which provide a tremendous number of resources to homeowners or households like yourself on what to look for in a solar contract, how to make sure that you're getting the best deal you can, and then 3 other ways that you as a solar homeowner can get involved in advocacy around solar power, because we want as many happy customers as possible. Because if, candidly, from the industry perspective, if we have an unhappy customer, referrals are our best ally, and it can work in the reverse too. So feel free to reach out to me. Happy to learn more and see how we can help.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Carrie. We had a couple of questions that I think, Jerry, you would at least be the natural point of departure for. Given this assertion that climate has these very, very important co-benefits for human health, why are we not seeing more health campaigns about climate change? And why are we not seeing healthcare institutions themselves being devoted to climate change and clean solutions?
I think as David and others were mentioning, Carrie was mentioning, we're in a ramp up phase here. And I mentioned Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action, and we are only ourselves about 3 years old. And one of the things that I do in working with the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health is to actually foster the development of Clinician for Climate Action groups in other states. So along with some colleagues, we've now built out 15 organizations. They're all brand new within the last 2 or 3 years. And they are working very hard to get the word out, both to the other health professionals and to the general public and to legislators. Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action certainly can't claim all of the credit for the success in the 2020 legislative session in Virginia related to the Virginia Clean Economy Act, for example, and some other bills that were passed, nor can we claim all the credit for the Solar Freedom Act this year. David and his group had a big hand, others had a big hand, but we are actually part of the process. And we went to virtually to Richmond in January to carry the case about climate and health to members of the legislature. Now, in terms of health institutions, there actually has been quite a bit of work to make health institutions more sustainable. There's a tremendous amount of work that still needs to be done. There's a wonderful organization called Healthcare Without Harm that has been leading health systems around the country to clean energy, to cleaning up their supply chains, decreasing waste in their food systems, and a whole host of other activities to make health systems more sustainable. And again, there's some like Gunderson in Wisconsin, the Case Western Reserve System in Ohio that have gotten further ahead. There's a LEED Platinum Children's Hospital out in California. So there are these little niduses where things are happening, and hopefully will propagate out from those niduses and become more evident as time goes by.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Fatima, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that I think there's a growing awareness of the connections between climate change and health. So, for example, right now we're in the middle of a pandemic, and studies have shown that exposure to air pollution from conventional fossil fuels that make climate change worse, that exposure to air pollution also increases your vulnerability to having severe impacts from COVID, including death. So there's a very clear correlation between public health, climate, and the drivers of climate change. So I think there is starting to be more of an awareness here.
Thank you. My plan is to pivot in a few minutes to a broader conversation that I think will be of broad interest to our audience. But really, as we're talking about issues related to health, jobs, electricity bills, and other co-benefits, we had a question actually from it came through the chat, I think. That was a question: is there a nexus between labor movement request for healthy, safe jobs and co-benefits of clean energy?
Yeah, I can start on that one. I mean, I think what is very clear with the president's American Jobs Plan, and you've seen the statements, he's definitely a union guy. We are trying to focus on making sure that the new jobs from this transition to clean energy are going to have high road labor standards. So most of the federal investments that are planned, they are going to be tied with high road labor standards. So there's definitely a connection. That is a connection, I think, that is a policy choice. It doesn't have to be that way, but that is the current goal now, is to make sure that workers and communities are benefiting from this transition to clean energy.
I would point out that climate change represents significant health risk to outdoor workers, whether they're agricultural workers, construction workers, gardeners, day laborers. Many of these people are not represented currently by any unions, and because many of these people are undocumented, they are in a very unjust way taken advantage of and not provided with shade, provided with water, provided with even cell phone access if somebody in a field gets sick, and how do you call an ambulance? So these are all issues that need to be considered, and we need to give special consideration to how do we deal with parts of our labor system that involve large numbers of undocumented people. We can't leave them behind. We can't do things that scare them away from help and services that they need. And so this is a real challenge moving forward.
Carrie, it seemed like you had something to add on this issue of co-benefits of climate action for occupational health and safety.
Yeah, I was really more going to speak to both the importance of having that health perspective as well as labor perspectives at the table when wanting to kind of pass policies or create programs that are beneficial for everyone, and bringing in diverse perspectives And speaking from a previous job perspective, I used to live and work in Oregon and worked on some of the bills that passed around the coal to clean program in Oregon, and that transitions Oregon from its previous coal fired power to a clean energy economy. And in that initiative, it was very important for the campaign to have faith communities at the table, to have speakers from the American Lung Association that really understand that health benefit, as well as the electrical unions or other groups where they could see their industries benefiting in this future. And so painting the picture of where have we been and how's that been challenging, and where are we going, and what are the benefits of that in terms of really being able to speak to different communities as well as legislators or policymakers.
So we had a question in the chat from audience member Kathy, who was really interested in this perspective on getting communities involved. So how do organizations and how can organizations work with the political process and with other community organizations to get involved in climate action, but also, since this is part of our mission here today, to make a transition to also supporting education about climate in our school systems, and then doing things like, say, retrofitting school buses, which we know has important human health benefits and may have important implications for climate action.
Yeah, I would say, the easiest thing to do is reach out to your member of Congress. I'm sure their staff can help you figure out what programs might be available. So I can just say that, the President's American Jobs Plan has a lot of money for transportation, over $600 billion. And within that, there will be a new Clean Buses for Kids program that aims to electrify at least 20% of the school bus fleet nationwide. So there will be even more money coming for this effort. And so if you're trying to figure out what are the programs that are out there, I think your members of Congress and their staff might be able to help you. If the question was kind of more about the, coming up with a cost share, I think that's a tougher question. But I think in terms of just finding out what programs are out there, I think that's a good place to start.
Last summer, DMME hosted a series of 5 webinars that was open to everyone, free and online, around different aspects of the recent policies that have passed. And during COVID, at least, we'll continue to use that format for other stakeholder engagement opportunities. And other groups are doing similar methodologies during COVID. And the Environmental Justice Council in Virginia is one. And again, those are meetings that are open to everyone and have a lot of representation from different diverse communities, from Appalachia to interfaith communities and networks to, mothers groups, et cetera. And so if you're involved in one of those organizations that also has a seat at the table for, in Virginia specifically, like the Environmental Justice Council, or one of the stakeholder groups that's, participating in these formal processes, those are great avenues. But as a state agency, we have to make a lot of our processes open to the public. And so we try to communicate that out as best we can. I think we have opportunities to do more of that. And, we'll continue to host a number of those conversations, electric vehicles included.
And just one final piece on that too. I think local issues are really the way to go. As a citizen, you can have so much impact by being loud, by latching on to a problem that you see and affecting change that way. If I were in your shoes, I'd definitely organize with some of the other parents at the school district, that would be beneficiaries, and work with them, because I'm sure there's contacts among that group of parents that can put together a proposal and really help hold the hand of the county or the school district for that application. But certainly never underestimate the power of working locally. It's incredible to have people like Fatima at the federal level directing our giant cruise ship that is our country to better changes. But I always think of myself as one of the people in the galleys, shoveling coal or name your resource and saying, all right, we each have our small piece to play, and often working locally, you can really get some pretty amazing things done and help spark change statewide or even nationwide.
Thank you, David. The analogy of shoveling coal was somewhat ironic in this particular case.
I'm gonna regret that. I'll have to think of a new metaphor.
A hydrogen-powered boat.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Fatima.
I was saying it's a hydrogen-powered boat.
There we go. Or we'll get to solar-powered boats at some point, but it might be a while.
So one of the things that an audience member has raised is that there is very substantial promise, of course, in working at the local level and with community organizations, but there are also some challenges associated with that. So I'll give you a flavor of this comment. Here I'm quoting from somebody in the Q&A box. There's an influential Virginia organization devoted to promoting and protecting rural economy, natural resources, etc. It opposes any changes to rural landscapes, including utility scale solar. In Northern Virginia, there's a local environmental organization that acknowledges climate change and recognizes needs for solar, but not in that particular locality. The basic idea is there are often these issues of not in my backyard, or these issues about competing local interests and whether, say, protecting rural landscapes should dominate goals related to climate. So I love the way that this this anonymous attendee phrased it. They just left it with the question, recommendations?
I can take that one at first, and then David, if you want to follow up, or Fatima. One of the programs that we have offered at the state level to localities and benefiting their community is the SolSmart program, which is actually funded through the Federal Department of Energy. It's a program that the Solar Foundation helped create with a lot of other national organizations with their input. And it provides sort of a holistic perspective around solar development for a locality where they can kind of right size the solar opportunity for their community and walk through their local government's their long-term strategic planning, what types of ordinances make sense for that community, how are different districts zoned between agriculture and industry. And it gives a lot of opportunities for kind of doing an analysis and recommending best practices. And that's sort of like the holistic approach that we start with. And then it kind of leads to where's the right place for solar? Can you maximize the amount of solar that's happening on brownfields or landfills or underutilized properties, over parking lots on the rooftops, and ensure that the locality and the citizens and the residents in that area are taking that holistic approach. And then you also sort of open the door to co-location, as I mentioned before, around agriculture plus solar. And, you kind of get people thinking about what makes sense in their community and where does it make sense? And, how are they going to be planning for their portion of contributing to a clean energy economy? And I think in that scenario, you're not starting with the largest system in the wrong place, kind of where it's being canceled out, and you're starting with the kind of where's the opportunity. Now, from a solar developer, that's a more challenging perspective. They have a property in mind, they have a project in mind, the landowner is ready to, move forward, and that, and so there's kind of a tension point between landowner property rights and what role the locality has and what neighbors have in that process of, creating the landscape that they want. I think we just want to make sure that other developments, we're thinking about the big picture.
David?
Yeah, I'll add that, for those environmental groups, call them out. So Montgomery County, Maryland, very progressive, climate forward county in Maryland. They did something similar when they say, well, we really don't like the ground mounted solar, and we're going to restrict it. We called them out, and we had a number of environmental groups also say something to that effect. You can't call yourself a climate activist county if you're not embracing climate solutions, even when it's difficult. To the point of equity, I think environmental organizations are grappling with their history and their approach towards something like utility scale solar. A number of environmental organizations were found to protect the land, and sometimes that meant protecting, where white people or wealthy white people live, and so they called themselves a preservation or environmental group, where in reality, all they were doing was just moving a development outside of their backyard to a place where, to a neighborhood where people of color or folks that didn't have as much access to political resources were. And so, if I were a member of that organization, or, if I was on a panel with them, I would ask them, I was like, well, are you all just, deferring all this development away from where your members live, or do you have a commitment to address the biggest existential threat of our time? I think, to maybe placate some of these counties is to say, well, why don't we just set ourselves a target and say, hey, we don't want to be overrun. We don't want to have a solar mecca in our county, but, we can allow 300, 400 megawatts in our county and leave it at that. That way we sort of spread a lot of these projects out across the state and ensure that no one county is seeing all the development, just because, I think if we left it to everyone to say, well, do you want to, if we left it to just the NIMBY folks, we wouldn't have any kind of development anywhere.
Yeah, I would just add that, I think there definitely is a role for natural climate solutions, and we definitely have to keep that in mind. And the climate challenge is so big, we really need all the solutions that we can get. But I think, like Carrie mentioned, a lot of this is about the front end planning, about figuring out what are the locations with the least conflicts in terms of like impacts on the environment and on the communities. And as David mentioned, a lot of it, I think, has to do with setting targets. It's really exciting now that in Virginia, we have a 100% goal for the Virginia economy. And so that will help us force these discussions about, well, where are we going to put these projects and how are we going to do this? But I think that's what it's going to take.
Jerry.
I just want to try and shift the language a little bit. If we're going to solve climate by 2030, we really need to get beyond just setting goals. We've set goals in the past with no intention of actually meeting those goals. We've set goals in the past without ever creating mechanisms for meeting those goals. We need to begin to take action. And unless and until we start to take action, we are not going to solve climate by 2030. And, I think as David mentioned, if some person wants to call themselves an environmentalist, if some group wants to call itself an environmental group, if some county or state or nation wants to call itself environmentally conscious, then they have to participate. This is an all of society process. Nobody can sit it out. Nobody can just wait for somebody else to do it. And we have to get active. We can't just continue to set goals.
Indeed, and there was a comment in the Q&A that just suggests not all of these things play out the way we imagine or hope, of course. And so one of the audience members, David, noted in Montgomery County, Maryland, there's been a process of community engagement and county level planning. And it was not a successful case of where the solar industry worked well with the community and in terms of preserving land designated for this purpose and keeping agricultural reserves set aside. So as a matter of practice, these things don't always work out the way we all aspire. And in many ways, my goal, by the way, is to conclude this conversation, unless audience Q&A steers us very strongly in a different direction, is to include this conversation with a little bit more about yourselves as people and a little bit more about this personal component of this, a little bit more about your personal journey, inspiring some students that may be listening to that. But before we get there, I really want to take a bridge from where we are, where we've been, to where we may be going. Let's call this the lightning round. I didn't warn any of you of this in the past. On the point that Jerry just made, fundamentally, if there's one or two things that you think we need to be doing to promote climate action and climate policy in Virginia or otherwise, what are those one or two things, stated as concisely and succinctly as possible?
Well, I'll start. We must have no new fossil fuel infrastructure in Virginia. For example, the Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action is working with Charles City County, a group in Charles City County. There's a proposal in Charles City County for 2 gas-fired power plants. That makes no sense in a state that has a goal for carbon zero of 2050. So the most important thing right now is to stop the build out of all new carbon polluting infrastructure.
Fatima.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think that nationally, the most important thing we need to do right now is we need to pass the American Jobs Plan. We need to invest in our infrastructure. We need to deploy climate solutions. We did that back after the financial crisis in 2009. And we really helped bring down the cost of wind and solar. And that's why we can say they're some of the cheapest sources of energy today. It's because of these federal investments. And that's going to take political support. And I know the folks who are dialed in live in districts that are represented by both Democrats and Republicans. So reaching out to those offices and support, I think, is the most helpful thing.
David.
Sure, thank you. I was trying to answer some of the questions we didn't get to in the chat. I would say make it as easy as possible to permit solar on rooftops, given that is something we can all agree on and is often very challenging due to fire setbacks, interconnection timelines, and other expensive soft costs. And so I think that's a win-win-win we can all agree on. And furthermore, make solar more equitable by developing a workforce that represents all Virginians.
Carrie?
I would say to provide the best guidance to decision makers, such as localities, who are at the front of those, permitting decisions or other investment opportunities, to provide matrices, decision matrices or planning models that help show them the path and the role that they can play in that as well as financing tools that are equitable. So ensuring that all communities, including low and moderate income communities, communities of color, and underserved communities that have been historically not receiving the investment, have those investment tools.
Yeah, and that actually dovetails very nicely with a question from Aisha, which, in your visions for effective climate action, how are those visions including and addressing racial and social justice? So I think, Carrie, your answer really hit on that directly. Are there others that would like to add to that conversation?
Sure, I'll just say that there's definitely an increasing focus on environmental justice, which has to do both with remedying the history of environmental racism, but also making sure that the benefits of the transition to a clean energy economy are shared widely. So that is something that is increasingly important. We had a bill on that passed the House last Congress. Environmental justice has been added to our committee mandate this Congress, and I know it's a top priority for the president as well. So I think increasingly we are centering environmental justice in the conversation about environmental policy and climate policy.
I know that all of the clinicians for climate action groups, these 15 groups that we've started so far around the country, have equity and justice at their core. And I mentioned, the Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action is working with a group called Concerned Citizens for Charles City County. Charles City County is a majority minority community that's having these gas-fired power plants thrust on them. We're trying to provide some of the scientific expertise to support the citizens who are opposing these power plants. And again, as I say, this notion is baked into all of the CCAs around the country.
I'll just add that recently every state agency had to submit our plans and actions around environmental justice through an interagency environmental justice report. And environmental justice and energy equity is absolutely a priority of, I don't speak on behalf of the administration, but in terms of what we're hearing from Governor Northam's office and the bills that are passing and what we're tasked to do as well and what we want to do, that it is absolutely a priority. And working with groups like the Council on Environmental Justice is a key priority for us.
Thank you for those answers. As I say, I aspire to pivot to some more personal questions and sort of maintaining optimism in what can be a very scary policy space. But I have one more policy question before we move there, which is how is and has the pandemic changed the climate action landscape? And are there important lessons that we've learned as people, as state governments, as federal governments, that are important for this conversation and important for our audience to be thinking about?
The climate crisis is a huge public health problem. And by definition, the pandemic is a huge public health problem. Unfortunately, the pandemic has documented how unstable the public health system is in the United States and how unable the public health system has been to stand up and act forcefully in a crisis. I think that a lot of the legislation that Fatima has talked about that has passed in previous Congresses would have helped had they passed both houses and gotten through the president. I think that the legislation that's coming down the pike that hopefully will be passed by both houses and ultimately signed by the president will help. We need to put patches and systematic changes in place as soon as possible. As Carrie mentioned, the climate crisis is a long haul problem. And if we don't fix the public health system now, we're not going to be able to thoroughly deal with the climate crisis.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I would just add to that. So I mentioned earlier that, we've learned through this pandemic that exposure to air pollution from conventional fossil fuels can actually increase your vulnerability to severe impacts from COVID, including death. So we're starting to see the cost of inaction on that aspect of drivers of climate change. In addition, there's so much more. I mean, we've learned about the vulnerabilities of supply chains globally. So that's going to be really important as we think about building out new technologies in the United States. I think the economic hit the country took as part of this pandemic has made it really important that the climate actions we pursue actually create jobs and new opportunities. So that's been really important. I mean, I think we've seen how interconnected the world is, and that's really brought it home. And so climate change is another global problem that's going to require global cooperation. So there's just, I think we're only beginning to understand the lessons from the pandemic for the climate crisis.
Yeah, and maybe this is a good point to circle back to where we began, which is when we think about issues of climate change, the potential implications are fairly stark. You know, flooding, human health, storm surge, heat-related injuries, tropical diseases, water supply, ag productivity, species extinction. I could go on and on and on. So as people who have devoted some substantial fraction of their professional and perhaps even personal lives to these topics, how do you maintain optimism about the present and the future? And what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to start. I mean, I think obviously this is a huge challenge, but there are also huge opportunities. And you know, one thing that's always inspiring to look back to, and we often hearken to this in our policy statements, is, you know, the United States was the country that put a man on the moon, and this is our moonshot, right? So this is our opportunity now to figure out what the solutions will be. And I mean, even just looking back at the past like 12 to 18 months, it's been amazing to go from, you know, the terror that associated the declaration of a global pandemic to now we have a vaccine. So I am not, I don't have any concerns about the ability of people to come up with new solutions. In the past, we didn't control for greenhouse gas emissions. Now we are trying to do that. So I feel like this is a very doable challenge. And, you know, what I'd say about, you know, solving climate by 2030, I think our goal is by 2030, we want to be on a path to solving the climate crisis, because it is a huge amount of work. It's going to take a lot of effort by lots of people, but it's definitely doable.
As a pediatrician, I've you know, focused my life on helping individuals, children in families and families in the community. And at this point in my career, when I look at what is the most important problem that's impacting on the health of children, the answer is climate change. And so I've chosen to, you know, sort of pivot from working with individuals to now working on a much larger scale to try and deal with a problem that does affect the health of every single human being on the planet. And so what better situation could a physician be in than to be working on that kind of issue? I certainly agree with Fatima. I think none of us would be here on this panel today if we didn't believe that this is a manageable problem. You know, we do not know today what all of the solutions will be. We need to set up a dynamic system that can work in a system fashion that Carrie talked about before to deal with these problems in an ongoing way. We know some things that we need to do now, which is get carbon and carbon equivalents out of the atmosphere as quickly as we can. We need to figure out how we are going to deal, for example, with climate refugees. We do a terrible job right now with dealing with any kind of refugee in this world. So, you know, it's going to get worse before it gets better. So there are things that we need to work out. And you know, for students who are listening to this webinar, I think the message is certainly not one of despair. The message is one of challenge. You know, what do you want to get involved with? Because there's plenty to get involved with, and we need all the brain power that we can muster to deal with this issue that impacts on everything in our world.
Carrie?
Yeah, I will add that there are so many organizations. I mean, every organization has a role to play, and every person has a role to play to help us meet the climate challenge, as well as to ensure an equitable economy that is accessible for everyone. And when I look across the landscape of different organizations and what actions they're taking, there are so many. And sometimes my challenge is, whittling it down to think like, who is the best, entity for me to approach around this opportunity, et cetera. So it feels very flourishing for me in the moment, and that gives me a lot of hope. I'll share one super quick anecdote. We have a lot of staff and resources out in the southwest portion of Virginia in coalfield country in Appalachia. And there are a lot of landowners who once had coal facilities operating, and a lot of those are currently abandoned mine sites. And there's a lot of investment and activity happening to repurpose those old fossil fuel based locations into other new repurposed sites, such as solar sites. And hearing from an individual in Portland, Oregon, that her family has land in Southwest Virginia that used to be a coal site, and now they want to see if it's an opportunity for wind or solar. Those types of conversations really give me hope.
I'll be quick. I'll just say we're all bailing out a sinking ship, and each of us have a thimble. And you can bemoan that the ship's sinking, but you just say, I gotta just focus on my one little thimble that's going to help bail out. And we've picked different career paths, and we each have a role to play. But I mean, when I meet some of these solar workers or talk to folks that have just put solar on their farm or their house, it's really extraordinary, and that's what keeps me going in this job.
Thank you, David. Thank you all. So one last question. We'll return to sort of the lightning round format. And Lee, I hope it's okay that I will use a broader version of your question as a point of departure, which is, as an individual, if we want to impact legislation, we want to impact our community, we want to impact climate action in some way or another, what is the thing that we should be doing?
Sure, I'm happy to start. I mean, I think the first and most important thing is to reach out to your member of Congress. I'm sure it can seem kind of intimidating, but they have contact forms on their website, easy to get in touch with them. I put a link in the chat to fact sheets. They're just like 2-page fact sheets about different issues. So honestly, if you're interested in a topic, like if you're interested in community solar, for example, you can click on our report, find out, just word search for community solar, and then you'll find the name of the bill that was introduced last Congress on community solar. And you can ask your member of Congress, did you co-sponsor this? I would really like you to. So that's a very easy format on whatever topic that's important to you within all of these possibilities for climate action. But really it is that level of engagement that's required, and members really do care about what they hear in their districts from their constituents. And, even if you're a college student, a recent grad, I think that they'd be excited to hear from you, and they want to know how what they can do benefits the folks in their district. So that would be my recommendation.
I would add on to that businesses are very influential to decision makers at the state level. And there are a number of organizations like breweries and wineries, and folks on the call may not necessarily be of drinking age yet, but maybe you soon will be. And thinking about, the local coffee shop or your employer or other businesses that are in the region that may kind of diversify the perspective of what does the business community also want to see in terms of what is guiding their world. And they may want, kind of certainty around what is the requirement for their business to operate in Wyoming in the future.
So let me just quickly share my screen for a second. This is part of the lightning round. It wasn't expected, but so I live in Virginia. Obviously, Tim Kaine is my senator. This is the contact form that Fatima was talking about. It took me between the time she said it and the time that I started to share my screen, to find it, to pull it up. And, you can fill this out at 8 o'clock at night, at 2 o'clock in the morning. You do not have to contact Tim Kaine or any other senator or any other member of the House of Representatives during office hours. You do it on your own time and they'll write you back. And then they'll keep you on their mailing list for information about the topic that you've expressed interest in. And they don't sell their email list to anybody else. So I'll stop sharing my screen. But that just, and it's the same for members of the state legislature. It's same for members of either your county or your city legislature. Everybody's got these contact forms. It takes less than a minute to call them up. You don't need to be writing a thesis. You do not need to be footnoting meticulously footnoting what you're writing. It can be 2 sentences. It can be, 30 paragraphs. The staff's going to read it. They might not be happy. But this is your chance, and the barrier, the threshold, however you want to look at it, is very low. So take that opportunity and share your experience. And then, as I said, vote. Unless you vote, you are not part of the system. And so as soon as you're old enough, make sure you're registered, and make sure that wherever you move, you re-register and make sure that you vote.
Thank you, Jerry. David, you get the last word, 30 seconds.
Sure. I'll make it quick. It's surprisingly easy to influence and have conversations with state and local legislators. So please do not hesitate to do so. Really, I think a lot of opportunities at the local level, be it on permitting or adoption of energy efficiency at your school or your local community, these things really add up. And with that, I just want to thank you, Jay, as well as incredible panelists, Carrie, Fatima, Jerry. Wow, I really enjoyed being on this panel with each of you and hearing your perspectives, and it's been a real honor. So thank you.
Likewise. Thank you, David. And many, many thanks to the audience members for their attention, and especially their amazing questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them, and I'm sorry that I rephrased a few of them. But yes, and my personal thanks to the rest of this group. It's been a really, really terrific opportunity to learn from you. So Leah, let me turn it back over to you to wrap things up, and my thanks to you as well, and thank you all.
Yes, the only thing left to do is to say thank you, as you all have done. So thank you all for your participation and engagement in this fascinating conversation, and thank you to Andres and Jonah and the Environmental Resilience Institute for their partnership and organizing. And then finally, thank you to all of you who've attended and submitted such great questions. It was really a really enjoyable time. So thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Goodbye, all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.